National Forces Association, recalling the memory of Ataturk's war of independence, with offices throughout Turkey set up in 2006. The Noel Baba Association, the Hagia Sophia Association, and a whole group of ultra-nationalist Ulus Açılar outfits, all created in 2006. And as you looked closer, it turned out that they were all created by a relatively narrow group of people who all appear to know each other. In our report, what we are describing is what happened at that trial, which has been ongoing since late 2007, and elucidating some of the connections that have emerged in, I think it's been now 28 days of court hearings. Turkish judiciary works extremely slowly, so sometimes there's one hearing a month, sometimes there's one every 2 months. This is why these trials last forever. But we actually went back and looked at all the protocols of all these court hearings, talked to all of the people involved, and tried to put together a picture of the background to this particular crime. And what emerges very quickly is that if you go deeper in this one instance, you quickly discover that this wasn't a group of youngsters, with crazy ideas who just woke up one day. The leader of that group was telling the others, and they admitted that in court, that we would have state guarantees. He walked in and out of the local police station. It turned out that the local gendarmerie in Malatya had a huge number of people just observing those missionaries, which makes it all the more surprising that this murder could be planned. Malatya University had a whole department, a group of researchers who were researching missionary activity in Malatya. Now again, put that in context, there was just a handful of people. This wasn't and we asked, we tried to find, we asked the lawyers, what are they researching? Have they published anything? It also turned out that quite a few of these Christians, it looks very much as if they were actually informers, smuggled into this group. So in the end, you get the impression that there was this very small group of Turkish Protestants. In the whole country, it is estimated that there are about 2,000, which makes it a third the size of the Buddhist community in Austria. So very, very hard to portray as a mortal threat. A campaign that presented these small groups as a real threat to the Turkish state, and a huge focus by the institutions, security institutions, in a place like Malatya and by the universities, on this very small community. And this began to come out in the course of this trial. Now what is interesting is that initially, when you talk to the lawyers, initially one gets the impression that the judges and prosecutors were afraid of asking too many questions. For example, some of the material that was initially collected was basically material collected on the Christians themselves. And one of the lawyers said it almost appeared at the beginning of the trial that this was a gang fight between two gangs. There were the Christians and there were these young ultranationalists. But as the trial went on, the judges became more and more confident. And more people were called into the witness stand. And I won't tell you the details, it's all in the report. But more and more people were coming in, former informers, people who worked for the police, people who worked for this secret gendarmerie institution, JITEM, which is of course associated with a lot of atrocities that have taken place in Turkey since the 80s, and began in the courtroom to point to the web of relationship between those youngsters and institutions of the Turkish state and the ultranationalist intellectuals that at the same time were running these campaigns in Istanbul. It turns out that many of the people in that group were familiar with people like Sedat Peker, one of the ultranationalist mafia leaders, that there were connections between the University of Malatya and the gendarmerie in Ankara, that there were connections between people that were talking to these youngsters and the ultranationalists like Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu and Veli Küçük in Istanbul. Now, this is emerging from this court case, and yet at this moment there are only 7 people indicted. A few weeks ago, another wave of arrests happened, and for the first time, for example, the head of the Malatya gendarmerie was actually arrested. When we looked at all this evidence, it did look very much surprising that he hadn't yet been arrested. He'd been called as a witness. At the very least, for negligence of duty, because if you have such a big part of the Turkish state observe this very small community and apparently completely fail to realize that there was this murder being planned with longhand, it does look very suspicious. But it is very, very hard in these court cases, and this is just one, to get to the bottom of these relationships. And it remains to be seen if at the end of this court case, which has already been ongoing since 2007, so this has been going on for a very long time, whether at the end, out of all of these suspicions, really hard evidence is going to emerge, and whether it is going to shed light on the activities of what the Turks call the deep state, but what is really just part of the security establishment and its activities targeting minorities. Now, why would there be such an obsession with this small group of Protestant Christians? Then we switched to another episode in 2009 for another tiny group of Christians, Istanbul's Greeks. As you know, there are also only about 2,000 left of what used to be a very big and proud Greek community in Istanbul. 2,000 mostly elderly Greeks. Every year now Greek schools are being closed down because there simply are no longer any students. I think the latest number of Greek students in Istanbul Greek schools was 240, of which a substantial part actually doesn't speak Greek but speaks Arabic. They're the Arab Orthodox who've come up from Antakya. So there's a very, very tiny, rapidly aging Greek community. But yet again, in 2009, a former chief of staff of the Turkish army, one of the leading generals of his generation, Yasha Bürganit, now retired, took the time to write an article, a scientific article for the research center of Beykent University in Istanbul, Strategic Research Center, to warn about the danger of Christians, Greek Orthodox in particular. It was an article on the Halki seminary. And what Yasha Bürganit is doing, he says, well, what would Ataturk say should be our policy on the Halki seminary? And then he quotes Ataturk speeches from 2003-2004, which is of course the height of the war, when indeed the Patriarch in Istanbul had been caught writing letters to the Archbishop of Canterbury asking for British support to kick out all the Turks from Istanbul. I mean, this was a moment at which the Patriarch really was part of the enemy forces at a time in which Istanbul had just been for 5 years occupied by Allied troops. But to quote Ataturk from 2004, from 1924 in 2009, to provide an answer what to do to the demands of opening this Halki seminary, the Orthodox priest school on the island near Istanbul, seems bizarre. Even more if you remember that in 1971, this seminary had 4 students. I mean, again, it is very, very hard to imagine how this can constitute a national security threat. Now, what do these episodes, the nationalist agitation, the ease with which it was possible to mobilize some of these ultra-nationalist youth groups, the concern at the top of, really respected and influential former generals with the tiny group of Christians, what does it really tell us? Well, on the one hand, it shows us one of the most interesting things about the Turkish Republic, which is that until very recently, the fears and lessons from the War of Independence, when, of course, as you know, Turkey was fighting for its survival, when Turkey was supposed to be divided up between the Allies after the First World War, when Anatolia was under attack from Greek forces taking Smyrna and trying to